Hi everyone, this is William from the Headphone Experience. I'm here tonight with my full review of the Wells Audio Dragon headphone amp. This is the level 1 version of this amp, and it was loaned to me for review by Wells Audio, and this amp currently has a retail price of $1,500 US. Like I said, this is the level 1 version. There is also a level 2 version with several upgrades that goes for $2,500, and a level 3 version with a ton of upgrades that goes for $5,500 US. Anyway, this is a hybrid type of amp that includes tubes and solid state. Basically, tubes gain in your input stage and then solid state gain in your output stage. This is a single-ended design, but it does have both RCA and XLR inputs, and the headphone out is both a 6.3 millimeter and 3-pin XLR output for the headphones. I will explain that for a minute, why it has both, even though it's a single-ended amp. Let me give you a quick look at the amp, and it is very large and very heavy, so I'm not going to hold it up here for too long, but I just wanted to give you a look. I'll try to show you more details in a few minutes. Anyway, like I said, this amp does have two sets of inputs, both RCA and XLR, but technically it's only one input. You can use either depending on whether you have RCA or XLR outputs coming from your source, but there is no switch to switch back and forth, so you can't hook up two sources at one time. So basically, it's just a convenience factor where you can use your XLR cables, or a lot of DACs, things like that, have better output measurements from their XLR outputs. So some people would want to use that for that reason. It has, like I said a minute ago, it has two headphone outputs. I'm assuming they can both be used at the same time, although you only have one volume control. But the XLR output isn't balanced and doesn't put out at a higher voltage. They both put out the same amount of power. So they're both going to sound basically the same as far as I know. This amp uses two tubes, and you have a choice of either a 12BH7, which is a 12-volt tube, or a 6DJ8, which is a 6-volt tube. My review unit came with the 12BH7 tubes. Using the 12BH7 tubes, you have four choices on your gain setting, and that would be 0, 6, 12, or 18 decibels of gain. Or if you were using the 6DJ8 tubes, you also have four options on your gain setting, but they would be 6, 12, 18, or 24 decibels of gain. The power output is rated at 2.4 watts per channel into 32 ohms, or 200 milliwatts into 600 ohms. Distortion on this amp is rated at 0.22% at full rated output. That's not normally, companies give their distortions ratings at 1 volt, but this is at the full 2.4 watts per channel. Distortion is rated at 0.22%, and that is into 32 ohms. The signal to noise ratio on this amp is rated at 93 decibels, and the crosstalk, which is your separation between your two channels, is at least 88 decibels of separation. This amp has a switch, or they gives you a choice of four different ground settings. And basically what this is for is if you have any ground noise in your circuit, which can come from contamination in your electric, whatever, you have 4 different choices of a resistor linked ground, a capacitor linked ground, a direct ground, or a combination of resistor and capacitor linked ground. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Well, no, I'll go ahead and talk about it now. To be honest, I have pretty clean electric at my house. I'm on my own transformer, and I have a dedicated circuit going to my headphone equipment, and noise has not been a problem. So to be honest, I was only able to pick up a slight amount of background noise with my most sensitive headphones, and I went through the 4 ground settings and it didn't really make a difference. So but depending on your situation, it could. So it is there for that reason. I did want to point out that the power cable that comes with this, it has your typical IEC connection at the amp end, but most amps do come with an 18 gauge cable, and this amp did come with a 14 gauge cable. Another feature I wanted to point out is that this amp has a warm-up circuit that when you turn the power button on, there's a blue light on the front of the amp that will flash for approximately 70 seconds until the amp is warmed up, and then will allow the amp to actually turn on and be used, and that way you don't get any warm-up noises or tube noises or anything like that through your headphones. So actually, by the time it warms up and clicks on, you get absolutely no noise, no pop, nothing like that through your headphones. Also, turning the amp off, there's absolutely no pop or any, a thump or anything like that when you turn the amp off if you have your headphones still hooked up. The size of this amp is 10.7 inches wide. It is 16 inches deep from front to back, 7.25 inches tall up to the top of the cover over the transformer. This amp weighs in at about 16 pounds. It is a very large and very heavy amp, and I will do my best to show it to you. Across the front here, you can see you've got your XLR headphone output, you have your volume knob, and you have your 6.3 millimeter headphone output, and above that you've got a little blue LED that flashes until the amp warms up all the way. Please be patient with me here for a second. This thing is large, it's heavy, and I don't have $1,500 to replace it if I drop it, so I'm trying to be careful. Anyway, across the back you have your XLR inputs, you have your RCA inputs, and you have your typical IEC 120 volt input for your power supply. Across the top of this amp you have several switches, and I'm going to try to show you these the best I can. First of all, this here is your power on and off, and then I'll try to move in a little bit. And these here, this next row, you've got 4 sets of switches, and those are your gain controls, and basically they're recessed. You can't accidentally change the gain. And it's been my experience, I have to slide the amp out a little bit on the shelf and reach down there and with a little screwdriver, and you have to switch off one setting and switch on another setting. You have 4 switches on each one, and there's 2 switches on each channel. So trying to think of the company. The one I can't think of it right now, but several companies do use this type of switches. For gain control, most of them actually place them on the bottom of the amp, and I do like them on the top better. It is easier to get to them without unhooking the amp and removing all your cables and all that. So anyway, let me try to hold this up again. Then on this row here, you have next to each of your tubes, you have a switch which can be set to the two different tube types, the 12 volt tube or the 6 volt tube. So you set those switches according to which tube you're using, and then in the middle you have your 4 choices of your grounding, your ground lengths, and then down in front you have a switch which you switch to either 12 volt or 6 volt, once again depending on the type of tubes you're using. And I'm going to set this down. It's getting pretty heavy. If you watched my last video, you know that I was pretty sick for a couple weeks and lost about 17 pounds and still haven't got my strength or endurance back, so I really don't want to hold this amp any longer. So anyway, I want to get into the sound of this, and in my first impressions, I spoke about the sound a little bit, but didn't get in too deep, and at that point hadn't compared it to any other amps. But before I talk about the sound, I did want to mention the type of music that I usually use doing my reviews. If you're not someone who has watched my reviews before, I mention this in most reviews, but anyway, I use a combination of different types of rock music, some pop, some electronic, more than anything acoustical music, and then a little bit of orchestral music while doing my reviews. My source while doing this this review is I was using CDs through a Cambridge Audio CD transport, putting a digital signal into 4 different DACs I tried with this amp, and I'll get into a deeper discussion about that in a few minutes, because this thing is kind of sensitive to the output level of your DAC. So but the 4 different DACs I used were the Topping D70S, and that's the MQA version, the Topping D90 SE, which is the flagship of the Topping DAC line, and an older, but my reference for a few years, the Benchmark DAC 1, and then I also used the built-in DAC in the Burson Conductor 3 reference, which is a combination DAC amp, but can be used as a standalone DAC. So, and then headphones, I used several headphones in reviewing this amp. I used the Hi-Fi Man HE400 SE, which I just got in recently. Quite a bit I use the Hi-Fi Man Aria, and that would be the newer stealth version. And the for power testing, my hardest to drive headphone, the Hi-Fi Man HE560. And then I also use the LSA HP2, the Kennerton Woden, and the Kennerton Ragnar, and that would be the planar version. And I've had that for about a month and just love that headphone, and really matched up well with this amp. So anyway, getting into the sound, just to give you an idea where the sound of this amp is, I would start out by saying that it's slightly on the warm side of the neutral, just all the way through the frequency response. It's the bass is a little got just a little bit more weight to it than what I would consider neutral, and kind of a warmer, richer mid-range than what I would say is neutral. It doesn't go as far as an all tube amp, or especially an OTL type tube amp, but it is definitely warmer than any solid state amp that I have in currently, or any that I can remember. This amp has exceptional clarity and detail. I mean, it's as clean as any other amp I have. The sound of it, just no graininess at all, just very clean, very high resolution, very detailed. The sound stage of this amp I would describe as both wide and deep. It does have a good three-dimension, what's the word I'm looking for? I use it a lot. A holographic sound stage where it has depth and layering to it. Once again, not quite as much as a full tube amp, but more so than most solid state amps. I did want to compare this to 3 different amps that I currently have that are in a similar price range. So 2 of these are solid state and 1 is a full tube amp with both tubes in the input and output stage. The first I'm going to compare it to would be the Audio GD Master 9, and I've had that for I think over 3 years now, and it has remained my reference amp for a reason. It's not necessarily the most detailed, best sounding, most powerful. It's not, it doesn't really stand out in any one category, but it's just an overall very versatile amp, and that's why I've held that and used it as my reference amp, because it can be used with just about any headphone, any IEM, anything like that. It's got plenty of power. But anyway, so the Master 9 is an amp that I've held on through many reviews as my reference. So it's, I consider it a really good amp that I really like. And comparing the sound of this amp to the Master 9, I've got to say that the sound is actually very similar in my opinion. They both have outstanding clarity and detail. They both have, there's no roll off at either end of the frequency response. They both have plenty of power and dynamics. The sound is strong and punchy, never lacking. They both have a very good sound stage. The differences I did hear though is, and probably because of the tube stage of this amp, the mid-range and more so than anything female vocals with the Dragon, they just come across as a little warmer, a little richer, and a little more liquid through the Dragon than they do through the Master 9. It's not a huge difference, but there is a difference there. And I've actually spoke to Jeff Wells from Wells Audio a few times on the phone. And Jeff, I think more so than anything with his amps, he strives for musicality above, to him that's way more important than an analytical sound that's going to bring out every last detail. But yet this amp is very detailed. It doesn't lack in detail at all, but yet it has that warm, rich, kind of creamy sound to it, especially, like I said, female vocals, and through the mid-range is where I really notice it. And in my opinion, it's exactly what Jeff is striving for. It has a more musical, more natural sound than any solid state amp that I've heard. Also, compared to the Master 9, I would say this amp has a little more depth to the sound stage, a little bit more of a holographic, layering, just a little bit more than the Master 9. And the Master 9 isn't shabby at all in that category. So this amp, it sounds every bit as good or better to me than the Master 9 does. Comparing this to the Burson, that would be the Conductor 3 reference. And I did want to mention that the Master 9 is a couple $100 cheaper than the Dragon if you order it directly from Audio GD in China. but you're going to pay a couple $100 on shipping on top of that, so it's going to put you pretty close to the same price range. Also, the Master 9 is, if you don't count the cover over the transformer sticking up here, the Master 9 is actually about twice the size of this amp and about twice the weight. It's about the same depth. Actually, it's slightly deeper, almost twice as wide, as tall, and it's just a huge amp. So this actually takes up about half the amount of shelf space as the Master 9. And I believe the Master 9 weighs in at 32 pounds. The thing is huge and it is heavy. Anyway, I started to mention that next I compared this to the Burson Conductor 3 reference. And the Conductor 3 is probably about half as big. It's about the same width. It's not as deep. It's about the same height. But the Conductor 3 is a combination DAC and headphone amp both, and it actually has a very nice DAC in it. And it is a little more expensive at, I think, $17.50 is the last price I know of on that amp. But like I said, it does have a substantial DAC built into it. So actually, if you subtract the price of the DAC, the amp is probably actually a little bit cheaper. Anyway, the Master 9 that I was talking about a few minutes ago is a Class A amp, and actually one of the warmer sounding solid state amps that I've heard. Well, the Burson is the same. The Burson is full Class A and does sound warmer and richer than most solid state amps. Well, once again, comparing the Burson to the Dragon, the Dragon, especially in the mid-range, especially in female vocals, is just a little bit warmer, little bit richer, and just a little more liquid in that mid-range frequencies. And once again, in my opinion, that's the tube stage of this amp doing that. And once again, the Dragon compared to the Burson, I think it has a little bit more depth to the sound stage and a little bit more of a holographic sound to it than the Burson. And once again, the Burson is a fantastic amp, in my opinion, one of the best I've heard. And I did want to mention that when I was comparing this to the Burson, I was using the built-in DAC inside of the Burson amp, and the Burson has two sets of outputs, either a fixed output to use it as a standalone DAC or a preamp output, and I did use the fixed output of the Burson, and then so I was comparing the two amps using the same DAC. And power-wise, this amp has plenty of power for any headphone I've thrown at it. Okay, the hardest to drive headphone I have is the Hi-Fi Man HE560, which takes at least 2 or 3 watts to sound the way it should. And this amp has plenty of power for the HE560. Same thing with the Burson, same thing with the Master 9. And none of these headphone amps are lacking any power to drive a headphone like that. There are a few headphones out there that are harder to drive than the 560. Namely would be the Hi-Fi Man HE6 or the Hi-Fi Man Susvara. I haven't had a chance to review either. I'd really like to get a hold of an HE6 just for that reason, to test the power output of amps. But the 560 HE from Hi-Fi Man, this amp, along with the Burson and the Audio GD, has plenty of power. It's not lacking at all for that headphone. The third amp that I compared to this amp is the Waveborn Edelweiss 3 Power Amp Plus, which is a all-tube amp, and it sells for about approximately the same price. The one I have is a prototype that isn't actually in production yet, but I think the estimated future retail price of that is about $14.95, so we're right in the same price range. Anyway, this is an all-tube amp, and it is rated at 3 watts per channel into 32 ohms of output. So it actually is a pretty good matchup for this amp. And comparing the two, I would say the Waveborn amp goes a little bit further as far as the tube sound, and that would be expected. It is a full tube amp. It uses 5 tubes. I think 1, 2, 3, 4 tubes. 4 tubes. And, but uses tubes in the input and output stages. Anyway, the Waveborn goes a little bit further. It's a little bit warmer, it's a little bit richer, it is a little bit more liquid. It has that full tube sound, but the Dragon isn't far behind it in that respect. Both amps, once again, have plenty of power for the HE560. The difference is this amp, you've got gain controls that have to be adjusted by little switches on the top. The Waveborn actually has an attenuator on the front that you can adjust, which will make that amp usable with anything from IEMs to at least the Hi-Fi Man HE560. The Waveborn does have a I would say it has a slightly deeper and more holographic sound stage than this does. The Waveborn has exceptional clarity and detail, but this amp is pretty close to it. The Waveborn is approximately the same size, a little bit smaller. This is 10 1/4 by 16. I think the Waveborn is about 9 by 13 inches and about the same height with the tubes. Of course, the Waveborn is a pre-production amp, and I'm not sure as far as how available it is, or I know they're handmade, and you probably have a little bit of wait on getting one made, but it is a fantastic amp. So the fact that this amp is real close is really saying something for this, because my end of the year review, I did rate the Waveborn as my amp of the year. And like I said, this amp doesn't lack anything. It does have a couple issues that I will talk about in a second. They are kind of important, actually. About the only dislike I can say that I have for this amp is the fact that it has on the back 2 sets of inputs, your XLR and your RCA, but they're both hooked into the same circuit, so you can't hook 2 different sources up to it. The one thing I would like to see changed on this is an input switch where you can use those as 2 different inputs and hook 2 different sources up. I would like to see that. Other than that, I can't think of anything about this amp I do not like. I mean, the little switches on the top to change gain, they're a little bit of a hassle, but it's not something you're gonna probably be doing very often. If you settle in with this as your headphone amp, it's possible if you've got a wide range of headphones, you may need to make gain changes, but in most cases you can leave it on one setting and use it with most headphones. But the one issue I did want to get into, or did want to discuss, and I did mention this in my my first impressions video. If you give me a second, I need a drink here. Okay, so here's the deal. I had a little bit of trouble matching DACs up with this amp, and that's because of the output levels of the DAC. Okay, my understanding is that the normal standard output level for a DAC is 2 volts. Okay, the first thing I tried with this were the 2 topping DACs. And I was looking at the statistics or the specs on the topping DACs. And both of those, the standard output is set to 2.5 volts, so they are a little higher than normal. Well, the reason I bring it up is when I hooked up either of the topping DACs to this, the output was up where if I was at high gain on this amp, the only headphone I could use was the HE560, my hardest to drive headphone, and the volume knob was all the way down at about 7:30 p.m. and I barely had any adjustment left. So high gain was pretty much unusable. I had to go down to the 3rd level of gain, even with my hardest to drive headphone, to have some usable volume, and had to go down to the 2nd level of gain with most other headphones, even a lot of planar headphones like the Aria Stealth, the Kennerton headphones, that sort of thing. So I tried it with the benchmark DAC, and the benchmark DAC is adjustable as far as the output, but I believe I've never done it, I believe it has to be done with a screwdriver on the back of the DAC. You can raise or lower the output level, but I believe that is set, the factory setting is at the standard 2 volts. And once again, that just seemed too high. It left high gain pretty much unusable, and needed to drop to the 3rd gain level for hard to drive headphones and the 2nd gain level for most headphones, and even down to the lowest gain setting for efficient, easy to drive headphones. So also I used the built-in DAC inside the Burson, which pretty much created the same issue. So the way I solved this problem, and if I'm making some sort of mistake here, I apologize. It's possible I might have something set wrong, but everything is set the way it came from Wells Audio for my review, except for the gain settings. The gain was set on high when I received this. Everything else, the settings for the tubes and all that are the same as they were when I received it. And I did look at the manual for this on Wells Audio's website, and I believe I have everything set right. So what I finally ended up doing, and I did mention this in my first video, that I started out with the topping D90, D90 SE DAC. And I thought the sound, it wasn't as tubey as I thought it was going to be. It sounded a little bit dry and almost analytical. Well, I found out that that wasn't this amp, that was the DAC. And after long sessions of comparing, I eventually decided that I like the topping D70 DAC more than the D90. The D90 is just too, it's too extreme. It's just too analytical and too dry for my taste. And I very much prefer the topping D70S, which has a much warmer, much richer sound, and it actually sounds very much like the two R2R DACs I have in right now. So I really like the topping D70S, and the nice feature about the topping is it has a preamp function where you can adjust the volume. So what I did is I settled in on the topping D70 DAC as my DAC of choice for this amp, and I put it in the preamp mode where I could adjust the volume of the RCA outputs. And what I did is I dropped the volume by 10 decibels. Okay, if I'm doing the math right, if that amp normally puts out 2.5 volts, if I dropped it by 10 decibels, that should put it down to 0.25 volts. And that seems to work out real well and just put everything in a better balance. So with the topping D70 SE, no, D70S MQA DAC, with the volume set at minus 10 decibels, I'm actually able to use high gain with the 560 HE from Hi-Fi Man, and now instead of the volume being at about 7:30, I'm at about 9 o'clock, and actually have a little bit of volume control. But actually, even with that headphone, the third gain setting, that would be, what, I've got it here somewhere, would be 12 decibels of gain, actually works out fine. So now with the topping DAC, with the volume set at minus 10 decibels, for real hard to drive headphones like the HE560, I'm using the third gain setting on this. But for most headphones, the second gain setting works real well. And that would be everything from most of the Hi-Fi Man headphones, the Sundara, the Aria Stealth, the Kennerton planar headphones like the Ragnar and the Woden, things like that. Most headphones you could just leave it on the second gain setting and you're going to have usable volume control and it's going to work out real well. Like I said, you might want to kick it up to the third gain setting for a hard to drive headphone, and if you had something extremely hard like, you know, the HE6 or something like that, you might want to go up to the fourth gain setting. The only time I went down to the low gain setting was for something super sensitive. Even the sensitive, efficient headphones like the Grotto SR80E or something like the LSA HP2, which is very efficient. The second gain setting still works very well with that. The only time I switched it down to the lowest gain setting was to test the background noise, and that's when I used my Sony MDR V700s, which is like a 20-year-old DJ headphone, but these things are extremely efficient, more efficient than most IEMs. And if an amp has any background hiss or any background noise at all, I'm going to hear it. Well, if I put this amp down to the lowest gain setting, and it doesn't matter at that point what the volume of my source is, I actually tried it. I ran, you know, the DAC back up to 0 decibels or back down to minus 10. And that doesn't affect it. But with this headphone on the lowest gain setting, I can pick up a slight background noise, and it's not really a hiss. I described it as a hiss in my first video. Now I would describe it as more of a static sound, but it's not enough that it would leave these headphones unusable, but it is there if my source is turned down to 0. I can hear a slight little bit of static in the background. And like I said, I did try the ground settings, the 4 different ground settings. That didn't make a difference. And the volume control on this amp didn't make a difference either, if it was all the way down or all the way up. There was just a slight static sound. They would be covered up completely by music, but with my source turned off, I could hear it a little bit. But this headphone here, like I said, it's more sensitive than most IEMs, and there are very few amps that I haven't picked up some level of background noise with this headphone. So what I'm saying is there may be a few super sensitive IEMs out there that wouldn't be a good match for this amp, but probably most IEMs, and actually, I mean, in my opinion, this isn't the amp you should buy for IEMs anyway, but you could use it. But sensitive, real sensitive headphones, like the Grotto, like the LSA HP2, that can't be used with some amps with higher noise floors. Can be used with this with no, I can't hear any background noise at all with either of those headphones with this amp on the lowest or even the second gain setting. So this amp is very quiet, and background noise isn't going to be an issue with anything other than the very most sensitive IEMs. And even in that case, listening to music, the music is probably going to completely cover the little bit of noise you might hear. So anyway, other than the issue with matching this up, and my recommendation is that you use a source. You know, most likely you're going to hook a DAC up to this. Use a DAC that has a preamp out with an adjustable output, and this is just going to be easier to work with and easier to use. But like I said, it's very possible I've got something set wrong and I've just got too much gain. But, excuse me, I know Wells Audio amps are notorious for having a huge amount of gain and can drive any headphone on the planet. So it might just be that there's a whole lot of gain here. But anyway, that's my recommendation. Use a DAC that has a adjustable output. And other than that, I really like this amp. It has outstanding clarity and detail. It has a nice, not super warm, but warmer than any solid state amp I've heard. Just a beautiful sounding, clean, super clean, rich, liquid sound to the mid-range. Female vocals sound absolutely beautiful on this amp. The musicality, in my opinion, is outstanding on this amp. It never sounds dry. It never sounds analytical. It's just a beautiful sounding amp. The soundstage has a more 3D holographic depth to it than any of the solid state amps I compared it to. And yeah, this is just, I mean, it's large, it's heavy, it takes up some room. I would recommend this amp, you know, for full-size headphones. Not so much for IEMs, that sort of thing, but it seems pretty versatile, and you could use it with just about any of those. So anyway, yeah, I really like this amp. You know, it's going to be hard to send back. I'm going to miss it, and I can recommend it. I think it's you know, the price, $1,500, not cheap, but I think you're getting a lot of amp for the money. So yes, I do recommend this amp, and I think it's about time to wrap this video up. It's gotten very long. So anyway, once again, this is William from the Headphone Experience. If this video has helped you, please give me a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel already, please do so. And you are all welcome to join us at the Headphone Experience on Facebook. We are, I think, somewhere around 15.7 thousand members. So I'd like to see you all over there. Once again, thanks for watching my video.